That morning, the mountains stood still. A soft fog hung in the air, like breath held too long, the trees unmoving, as if they too were waiting, bracing for something they couldn't name. Somewhere beneath their canopy, laughter rang out, youthful, wild, unafraid. 12 students, barely old enough to vote, yet filled with a sense of invincibility only the young can truly possess. It was June 7th, 1992. The last time anyone saw them alive. The group was part of an elite environmental studies program, a summer expedition held annually by Kettering Academy, a private high school tucked deep in the wooded outskirts of Oregon. It was supposed to be a rite of passage. 6 boys, 6 girls. All handpicked, gifted in the sciences, passionate about conservation. They called it the Earthbound Dozen, a name they gave themselves half-jokingly. Now etched into the school's silent walls like a ghost's whisper. Their leader was 17-year-old Jonathan Elroy, valedictorian, Eagle Scout, son of a well-known physicist. His best friend, Malik Bryant, quiet but brilliant, came from a long line of Army veterans. There was Lacey Monroe, an artist who painted forests from memory. Rena and Claire Wilson, twins, inseparable since birth. Jordan Stokes, aspiring journalist, always with a tape recorder in hand. Each of them carried something more than just supplies in their packs. Hopes, regrets, fears. The things no one talks about until it's too late. The last photo taken shows them smiling on the edge of a Coldwater Ridge, arms slung over each other's shoulders, the trail winding behind them like a ribbon disappearing into the green. A picture-perfect beginning. You'd never guess what was coming. By nightfall, a storm swept over the Cascades. Radio contact went silent. By morning, they were gone. At first, no one panicked. This was normal protocol. The group had a 2-way satellite radio and were instructed to check in every 48 hours. Delays happened. Maybe they were delayed setting up camp, or maybe weather interfered with their signal. It wasn't until day 5 that Kettering Academy filed the missing persons report. That's when the search began. The woods that summer swallowed sound like a secret. Helicopters combed the skies, dogs sniffed tirelessly, volunteers trampled miles of underbrush. Nothing. Not a single footprint. Not a scrap of torn fabric or dropped gear. Even the most basic signs, ash from a campfire, discarded food wrappers, disturbed wildlife, were absent. It was as though the forest had pressed reset on itself. As though 12 lives had stepped into the shadows, and the shadows had closed behind them. Authorities focused on the most likely theories. Avalanche. But no terrain in that area matched the conditions. Animal attack, but not one drop of blood. Foul play, but by whom? No suspects, no motive, and too many people to disappear without evidence. The search went on for 11 weeks. Then the letters started arriving. One by one to the families of the missing came thin envelopes. No return address, inside blank paper. Just a sheet perfectly smooth, pristine white. At first, authorities dismissed it as a cruel prank. But the parents couldn't, especially when they began noticing something strange. Each letter had a faint smell, different for each recipient. Lavender, cedar, gasoline, rain. Some said it was nothing, but others believed it was a message, an invisible clue left by whoever had taken them, or whoever was left behind. The FBI intervened. Forensics confirmed the paper had no ink, no fibers linking it to a known source. No fingerprints. Then, like everything else in the case, the letters stopped. And so did the investigation. The families buried 12 empty caskets. The school held a memorial. Time marched forward as it always does. But underneath the silence, beneath the layers of days and years, the absence grew like moss-soft quiet, impossible to remove. Until 33 years later. A letter, handwritten, postmarked June 7th, 2025, and signed Jonathan Elroy. The letter arrived in a battered manila envelope. No sender, no city. Just the initials J.E. scrawled in the return corner with a trembling hand that pressed harder into the paper than it should have. The ink had bled in places, as if the writer hadn't been used to writing or hadn't had steady hands in a very long time. It was addressed to Mrs. Caroline Elroy, Jonathan's mother. She was 74 now, living alone in a modest one-story home in Ashland, Oregon. Her husband had died in 2006. Heart failure. But those close to her said it wasn't his heart, it was the weight of unanswered questions. She hadn't opened mail herself in years. Her hands weren't what they used to be. But when her caretaker brought the envelope in, she said she felt something before she even touched it. A chill in the room, a tightening in her chest. And according to her, the scent of pine just for a moment. She opened it with a kitchen knife. Inside was a single sheet of aged paper, yellowed at the corners, creased once down the center. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jonathan's. A mother doesn't forget her son's writing. The way he looped his G's, the small space between his O and N. She had saved every letter he'd written from summer camps, school trips, birthdays. She knew it. It was his. She wept before she read a word. Then she read June 7th, 1992. Campfire log entry number 1. The others are sleeping. I think something followed us today. She froze, reread the date, 1992. It didn't make sense. If this was a journal entry, why had it just now surfaced, and how, where had it been kept for over 3 decades? And why send it to her now? The letter continued, rambling in tone, almost paranoid. Jonathan described something strange in the woods. Not an animal, not a person. A shape in the trees that moved when we didn't. A coldness that followed when the air should have been warm. He wrote about the others hearing whispers. Echoes where there were no canyons. Shadows that doubled, then vanished. That night, he wrote Jordan had woken up screaming eyes wide, saying he saw someone outside the tent staring back with no face. But by the time the flashlight hit the trees, there was no one there. At the bottom of the page, the handwriting changed sloppier, like he'd been in a rush. If you're reading this, I found a way out. I don't know what's left of me, but I remember you, Mom. I remember the way you tucked my maps under my pillow. Please don't let them forget us. And then it ended. No signature, no date, no next page. Just a single sentence written across the back in all capital letters, "Do not trust the second letter." It was chilling, but also somehow impossible to ignore. The local police dismissed it as a hoax. Maybe a fan of the old case, maybe someone trying to profit from renewed attention. But handwriting experts verified the letter, down to the pressure of the pen, down to the strokes. It was real. Caroline's story went public. National networks covered it. Old reporters pulled archives from 1992. Podcasts resurfaced. Hashtag Chach Earthbound dozen trended across platforms. And then one by one, the other families began receiving letters too. Each from a different member of the original group. Each containing just one page. Each with a final line warning, "Do not trust the second letter." And then the second letters came. The second letters were different. Typed, anonymous, slicker. No personal details, no memory. Just cryptic phrases, like commands. They are not who they were. If they come back, do not open the door. The forest does not let go. It only trades. This time, every letter had a strange marking in the corner. A triangle with 3 dots inside. Forensic teams couldn't trace the symbol to any known organization. Not cult-related, not military, not tied to existing belief systems or groups. But those who had followed the case for decades began to notice something else. That symbol had been seen before. In the background of one of the original search and rescue photos, a blurry outline of a tree trunk revealed a nearly identical triangle carved into the bark. No one had noticed it at the time. But now, with digital enhancements, it was undeniable. The symbol had been there all along, hidden, waiting, and so had something else. Deep in the Jefferson wilderness, where the dozen had last been tracked, a new discovery emerged. An off-grid hiker, Annalise Grant, was found wandering barefoot near Coldwater Ridge. Her clothes were tattered, her eyes sunburned, and her voice gone from screaming. She claimed she'd been camping for just 2 days, but her skin told a different story. Her feet were cracked, her nails grown out, her body dehydrated far beyond what a 2-day hike could do. When authorities finally calmed her enough to speak, she uttered one sentence before collapsing into sleep. They're not dead. Just misplaced. She had no connection to the original case, no family ties. Just a woman who had gone hiking and somehow returned with knowledge no one had given her. They examined her belongings. Only one item was unusual: a folded piece of fabric, a patch, faded navy blue with 12 pine trees embroidered in a circle, the original logo of the Earthbound Dozen. A patch that had never been released publicly and hadn't been seen since June 1992. The forest, it seemed, was not finished with them. Authorities questioned Annalise for days. Doctors said her vocal cords were inflamed from prolonged screaming. But it wasn't until her second night in the hospital that she began to speak again. Hoarse, flat, as if someone had turned the volume of a person down, but not their urgency. She said she remembered waking in the woods but not falling asleep there. Said she walked in one direction for what felt like hours, maybe days, but the trees never changed. Paths looped back. Birds stopped chirping. Her phone, even with a full battery, refused to turn on. And then she said she saw them. 12 figures. Not walking, not standing. Just there between the trunks. Still, unmoving. Like statues made of something human-shaped. Their faces blurred in her memory not for lack of trying, but as if the features receded when she tried to focus. But she remembered one thing clearly. They were all wearing the same patch. 12 pine trees. A circle. And the boy in the front, she said he was holding something. A notebook. She didn't speak his name, but she didn't have to. Investigators didn't even prompt her. The photos were brought out one by one, and when she saw the image of Jonathan Elroy, her face turned gray. "That's him," she whispered. But he didn't blink. He didn't breathe. None of them did. She was released a week later, placed under psychiatric observation, and the world, as it always does, tried to explain it away. But not everyone forgot, especially not Malcolm Stokes. Jordan Stokes' younger brother had been only 5 years old when his brother vanished. Too young to understand the funeral without a body. Too young to ask why his mother cried into a pillow every night. But as he grew older, he read. He watched. He archived everything. He had spent his adult life quietly obsessed, not just with Jordan, but with the forest. He'd hiked Coldwater Ridge every year since he turned 18, alone, always on the same date, June 7th. Each year he carried something his brother had loved, an old tape recorder or a worn paperback book on journalism or a photo of them both in plastic. He left them in different places. He said, "If there's even the smallest chance he's still out there, I want him to know I'm still trying." And in 2025, after news of the letters broke, he received one of his own. Not from Jonathan, from Jordan. A cassette tape postmarked from Spokane. The label simply read, "Entry 2." The contents were surreal. Jordan's voice, unmistakably his static-ridden but steady, began with "Day." What followed was 23 minutes of what sounded like a spoken journal, describing in sharp detail how the group had become disoriented. Their compass spun wildly. The sun would rise, then rise again without setting. Rena had scratched her legs raw, convinced bugs were crawling just beneath her skin. Malik had started reciting his father's war stories verbatim in his S. And then, in a sudden break in the audio, Jordan. We found a door in the clearing. It wasn't there yesterday. It wasn't built. Malcolm brought the tape to the FBI. But the FBI denied any involvement, refused comment. When pressed, they claimed the audio could not be authentic. But Malcolm knew that voice. Every stutter, every pause, every word he'd memorized as a child listening to old home videos. It was Jorda. And then the questions start. If the students had vanished from this world, where exactly had they gone? And more frighteningly, were they trying to come back? The second letter had said, "Do not open the door." But someone already had. And the ripple had begun. All across the Pacific Northwest, campers began reporting strange sightings, flickering shadows, whispering winds in still air, electronics malfunctioning in proximity to certain moss-covered stones. Stories poured in of hikers who vanished for hours, only to return swearing no time had passed. But the most disturbing account came from a retired ranger named Paul Metz. He'd worked the Jefferson Territory for 3 decades, had been part of the original 1992 search. He came forward in August 2025, aged and tired, saying he couldn't take it anymore, that he'd seen something during the early search that he was told never to report. A structure. No one believed him at first, but then he showed them a photograph. A single Polaroid grainy taken at twilight, showing a clearing deep in the forest, and in its center just barely visible a shape, like a door frame made of twisted bark and bone. No hinges, no handle, just standing there, waiting. The photo had been cataloged and then pulled from the official report. Metz said superiors from a federal agency had visited camp the next morning. He was told to hand over the photo, one he kept, just in case. He said the man in charge wore a patch with a symbol, a triangle, 3 dots, no name, no badge, no agency title. And the same symbol was seen again in Montana, when a small town called Briars Hollow reported 3 people missing in one night, all of them campers. All of them found later wandering the woods barefoot and confused, each with the same story. They had seen a group of children, standing in a circle, whispering, each one wearing a navy patch, and each one mouthing the same words over and over again, though no sound came out. "We are the earth. We are the bound." It had always been just a phrase. The Earthbound Dozen, a name, a moniker, something sweet and forgettable until it wasn't. But after the letters, the sightings, the symbols, and the tape, it became something else. A warning. That fall, an independent research group calling itself the Boundary Watch formed online. Made up of scientists, folklorists, ex-FBI technicians, and a few surviving relatives of the missing. Their mission was singular: track every anomaly linked to the Coldwater case and the 12 students who vanished in 1992. They started with the letters, cross-referencing ink-type envelope texture, even microscopic fibers. It was Malik's letter that cracked it first. Hidden beneath the ink when exposed to UV light was a series of thin red markings, not words, coordinates. When mapped, they pointed not to Coldwater Ridge, but to a nearby glade almost 3 miles off the original trail. It was a place with no name. Locals called it the Blistering Quiet, not because of noise, but because of its absence. No birdsong, no wind, not even the rustle of leaves. Just silence, like standing inside the moment after a scream. The Boundary Watch dispatched a small team equipped with body cams, radiation detectors, and GPS. Only 2 returned, and neither would speak for days. What the footage revealed changed the case forever. At 03:14 a.m., the cameras showed the team setting up camp. They talked casually, joked nervously, whispered the names of the 12 as if invoking them might grant permission to enter. The clearing ahead was normal. Trees, ferns, fog. Then at 03:46, the camera flickered. Audio dropped out completely. But the image held. And for exactly 11 seconds, something appeared in the clearing. 12 figures, standing in a wide circle, each the same height, each unmoving. Their faces were not visible. The light from the headlamps flared as though something on their skin or over it reflected too brightly. But their posture was unmistakable. They weren't just standing. They were waiting. And in the center of them, pulsing faintly with a light no one could source, was a narrow vertical slit in the air, like a seam in the fabric of reality, shimmering, breathing. Then everything went black. When video resumed, it was daylight. The tents were torn open. 2 researchers gone. No blood, no sign of struggle. Just that same triangle burned into the earth where the figures had stood. 3 dots, and 1 word carved into the bark of a nearby tree. Traded. By winter, the government stepped in, not publicly, but quietly. Trails were closed. Landslide risk, they claimed. Signs were posted warning of wolf activity, though no wolves had been seen in the Jefferson Range in over 40 years. Helicopters circled the region under the guise of climate surveying, and anyone who asked questions too loudly found themselves visited, interviewed, dismissed, or in the case of Caroline Elroy, Jonathan's mother, discredited. She went missing on December 12th. Just days after giving an interview to a podcast called Echoes in the Pines, in which she claimed she'd started receiving a new kind of message. Whispers, not in letters, not in dreams, but from her own radio. She said the static would sometimes pause, and then she'd hear it. Jonathan's voice, faint, far away. Repeating the same phrase, "We came back wrong." Her disappearance wasn't even mentioned on local news. But her car was found just outside Coldwater Ridge, its engine cold, headlights still on. In the passenger seat, a map of the trail system, and taped to the steering wheel, her original letter from Jonathan, now stained at the bottom with something new. A single drop of blood, not hers. DNA testing revealed something disturbing. The blood was a perfect match to Jonathan Elroy. But the tissue structure was inconsistent with a human sample, as if something wore Jonathan's DNA, but wasn't entirely him. People began asking the question no one had wanted to face: if the Earthbound dozen were alive, what had they become? And why now, after 33 years, were they reaching back through the trees? The first to go back in willingly was Evie Wilson. You might remember the name Claire and Rena Wilson, the twins who vanished. Evie was their little sister. Only 6 when it happened. She grew up in a house where their bedroom door was never shut, where 2 beds were always made, though no one slept in them. Her parents kept their daughter's toothbrushes in place for 10 years after they were gone. Evie's life had been shaped entirely by absence. She became a wilderness therapist, studied forest trauma, guided young people through healing retreats in the Oregon backcountry, always avoiding Coldwater Ridge, though she never admitted why. But after the letters resurfaced, after the Boundary Watch footage leaked, she made a choice. "I can't explain it," she said during her final phone call to a friend. "But I feel them. Not like ghosts, like a magnet. Like if I just walk far enough, they'll meet me halfway." She entered the forest on March 1st, 2026, alone, carrying only a backpack, a flare gun, a body cam, and a worn bracelet that both Claire and Rena had once shared, red thread braided with small wooden beads, initials burned into them, C+R+E. Her last recorded footage begins like so many others. Fog, silence. But 3 hours in, things shift. The trees begin repeating. Not types of trees, the same trees. Identical scars on the bark. Same broken limb on the left. Same rock formation nearby. Evie notices. Marks a trunk with red chalk. 15 minutes later, she passes the same mark again. Then again. She speaks aloud, steadying herself. Okay? You're circling me. I'm not circling you. The compass begins spinning. The temperature drops despite forecasts predicting warmth. And then from deep behind the trees, a sound. Not a voice. Not an animal. A tone. Low, hollow, like something vast had exhaled just beneath the earth. She whispers Claire, and the trees answer. A rustle not from wind, but from movement. Her camera turns. We see it for the first time. A figure. Female. Standing just beyond the tree line. Hands by her side. Hair matted. Clothes ancient, sun-bleached, weather-worn. She doesn't speak, but the bracelet on her wrist is unmistakable. Red thread, wooden beads, initials C+R+E. Evie stumbles forward, crying out, Claire, Claire. But the figure only lifts one hand slowly, then turns, and walks into the glade. That's where the video ends. No screams, no fall, just a gradual fade of light as the lens static pulses, then dies. Evie didn't return, but something else did. That night, a ranger patrolling near Jefferson Ridge found a child standing barefoot in the middle of the trail. 7 years old, pale, silent, and wearing a jacket belonging to Malik Bryant. It was the same jacket seen in photographs from 1992. Same stitched initials, same iron-on NASA patch, somehow perfectly preserved. Despite 33 years of supposed wilderness exposure. The boy didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, the only thing he asked was, "Am I still the same age as the others?" The implications were staggering. Had time moved differently for them? Was the forest preserving them or replacing them? And then a letter arrived at Kettering Academy. Typed, unmarked, it read, "Your students were not lost. They were offered. No signature. Just a single phrase at the bottom. Trade complete." The FBI sealed the entire mountain region the next day. Publicly, they cited ecological contamination. Privately, documents leaked that showed language like dimensional instability and nonlinear time structure. But the most alarming phrase of all, anthropomorphic returnees do not appear emotionally human. And if that was true, then what had come back, or Malik, or any of them, it was something else. But the story wasn't done unraveling yet. Because then came the third wave of letters. Short, scrawled, almost childlike in form, each to a family member, each written in a different hand, and each beginning with the same 5 words. We remember what we chose. Some saw it as a confession, others as a lie. But the Wilson parents, now in their 80s, read the line over and over until the words meant something else. They hadn't been taken. They had chosen to stay. And what if the glade, the strange space the door as described by Jordan's tape, wasn't a trap at all? What if it was an escape? What if 12 children hurt by the world, frightened of growing up, terrified of losing each other, found something that said, stay? Become part of something eternal. Wouldn't they take it? Wouldn't some of them say yes, but even eternity has limits? And if what came back was them, then someone or something had been left behind in their place. A shadow, an echo, or a warning. Because now children across the Northwest have begun drawing the triangle. On sidewalks, in chalk, on homework, in dreams, 3 dots. And when asked what it means, their answers are always the same. We're waiting for our turn. By the time spring came, the forest had changed. It wasn't just in the air. It wasn't just the missing time or the stillness or the strange reappearances. It was in the way people talked about the forest. Even those who had never followed the Coldwater case now instinctively avoided its edges. The trail maps were quietly reprinted without it. The GPS systems in rental cars stopped showing the service roads near the glade, as if something or someone had redrawn the world from inside. And in the silence that followed Evie's disappearance, a final letter arrived. It was addressed not to a family member, not to the school, but to Malcolm Stokes, the younger brother of Jordan, the one who never stopped searching. It was handwritten, thick black ink on yellowed paper, dated June 7th, 2026. It began simply, "Malcolm, I remember you. You wore a blue sweater the day we left. I almost asked to borrow it. It was signed, J." The tone of the letter was different. Not panicked, not cryptic. It was warm, clear, like a message from someone who had long ago made peace with something he could no longer explain. But it included coordinates and an invitation. One last crossing, one last trade. The door opens again on the 33rd hour after the 33rd year. You'll know it by the sound. Malcolm didn't tell anyone he was going. He left a voicemail on a secure boundary watch line. His final words, "If it's not him, I'll know. But if it is, if there's even a chance," long pause, "I won't come back alone." He entered the forest at 3:10 a.m., and for 48 hours, no one heard from him. The footage found later was never released to the public, but portions of the transcript leaked. It detailed his passage through the same circular glade, not empty this time, but filled, with objects, a pair of glasses, a child's sketchbook, a shoe, all from the missing, each one untouched by time, laid out neatly around a center of soft moss where he said the air bent. And in that place, he heard the voice, not out loud, not from the trees, from inside him, like memory being played in reverse. And then, in a single instant, the boundary opened. Malcolm stepped forward, and something stepped back. The body was found on the edge of a service road 2 miles outside the boundary. It was Malcolm. No injuries, no trauma, no sign of exposure. But his hands were bleeding. Deep scratches up the wrist as if he'd been clawing at something that wasn't there. And in his left hand, a photo. Uncreased, pristine, 12 students smiling on Coldwater Ridge, arms around each other. But this version had one difference. In the photo, there were 13, a 13th figure, faint, behind the others. Face in shadow, no one recognized it. No one wanted to. Because on the back of the photo in black marker were 6 words one always stays to keep it open. And that's when people began to understand. The earthbound dozen weren't a curse. They were a mechanism. The glade wasn't just a door, it was a trade route. It needed balance. 12 in, 12 held. One left behind to keep the hinge from sealing shut. And the question everyone feared most was, who was the 13th? Was it one of them? Was it someone else entirely, or worse? Was it the forest itself using them like bait? There was no answer. Only a pattern. One that couldn't be denied. Every 33 years, something opened. And something tried to come through. The final clue came not in a letter, but in a journal. Found buried beneath the oldest tree in the glade by a group of unauthorized hikers who never released their names. A notebook water-stained but legible. The first page Claire Wilson final entry. She wrote, "We thought we were explorers. We thought we'd be remembered as the ones who touched the untouchable. But we weren't pioneers. We were keys, time bent around us like fog. And in the silence between the stars, we heard it breathing. We stayed, because some part of us wanted to. Because we were running from something too. But now it's not asking anymore. It's calling, and whoever answers next won't get to choose. The final page simply read, "Tell our story, or you'll become it." So now here we are, with a story that doesn't close, with a mystery that doesn't ask to be solved, only understood. 12 students vanished on a camping trip. 33 years later, the forest gave something back. But not everything, and not everyone. And each time someone walks past that tree-line camera in hand hope and heart history in their blood, they're not just chasing ghosts. They're following the echo of a question. What if the ones we lose aren't really gone? What if they're just becoming something else? And the next time you hike deep enough to lose the signal on your phone, and the wind goes quiet, and the trees seem to lean a little too far in, and ask yourself, did you hear something behind you? Or was it just the forest, waiting for its trade?